Deep in the jungles of the Pokemon world, you can find them in the millions. Swinging, climbing, flying, and even banana-ing all over the place.
Stupid banana-necked fuck! What even is this thing?
Well, it's a Pokemon, Maxwell. You know, the thing we talk about almost exclusively on this channel now.
I know that. I mean, what are those? Are those really fruit? Wouldn't that mean Tropius is just a plant? What does it even do?
That's actually a really good question. Are grass-type Pokemon plants or animals?
Oh, great. What have I done?
No, like really. I mean, we know some of them are just animals with plants on them. But then there's also the grass-type Pokemon that are definitely plants, like Oddish. But are they really? I mean, would eating an Oddish be vegan?
Also, who cares? Vegans are fucks.
Didn't that guy just like lose everything because he said that word publicly?
Yeah. Too bad I'm only possibly here after the editing phase, so you censor me all the time.
So, grass-type Pokemon, plants or animals? Well, to figure that out, we need to ask some other questions. Like, what even is a plant? Me big brain think definition says that it's any member of the kingdom Plantae, comprising of multicellular organisms that typically produce their own food from inorganic matter by the process of photosynthesis, and that have a more or less rigid cell walls containing cellulose, including vascular plants, mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. The word Plantae reminds me of Shantae, and now it will for you too, and I like that a lot. Maybe too much. She deserves to be more relevant! But that's a pretty rigid definition of what a plant can be, right? Then let's check what an animal is and spot the differences. An animal is any member of the kingdom Animalia, which are multicellular organisms that have a well-defined shape and usually limited growth. They can move voluntarily, actively acquire food and digest it internally, and have sensory and nervous systems that allow them to respond rapidly to stimuli. So, right off the bat, we can see that there are a few differences that are pretty big. So first, plants normally create their own food, but there are a few plants that don't rely on photosynthesis to survive. Some actually lure prey and eat them, essentially hunting, which isn't to say the definition is wrong, though, because it does say typically. So who knows? That can change based off of the plants that we see do that regularly, like Venus flytraps. So like Carnivine. Anyway though, it's clearly not hard fact, so grass Pokemon are totally able to eat food that is not derived from themselves. And they'd still be considered plants. Otherwise they'd all just be animals right here and now. But a counterpoint to that is that the definition says inorganic food sources, like the sun or dirt, stuff like that. But some Pokemon are made of rock and eat rock, or are literal balls of ghostly fire light energy. I mean, they could be organic, or inorganic. So, this Pokemon world is a little odd. Oh, hush. Another interesting fact is that they denote animals as being able to react rapidly to stimuli, and well, I don't know. I've seen plants move at the slightest touch. I know I already used carnivorous plants as an example, but they can snap shut with just so much as a fly landing on them. But just so I don't only rely on carnivorous plants as the exception, there are other plants that react to stimuli. Enter the Monstera, an apt name for this radically cool looking leafy plant. It will actually move along the forest floor, looking for a tree's shadow, so it can then climb up its trunk to grow larger. There are even some Monstera that use the tree as a source of nutrients. Thus, it's getting nutrients from an organic thing. Heck, there's a breed of these plants that produce fruit! Also aptly named Monstera delicious. Apparently the fruit tastes like a banana mixed with a pineapple. Interesting combo, to say the least. But this thing is practically a Pokemon already. I don't know why they haven't made a Monstera grass Pokemon with these really cool looking leaves with holes in them. It could be grass dark, or grass ghost, or something spooky and intimidating since it takes over trees and monster, parasitic, evil. I don't know. But I do know that another plant that is super reactive is the Mimosa Pedusia. I'm probably mispronouncing that. In fact, the whole Mimosa genus is pretty reactive, closing its leaves at the faintest brush. And if they sustain damage, they have been known to even shut leaves across the entire plant until it heals. But I mean, all in all, they're able to do all of this reaction without a brain even. So that's a pretty rapid reaction to stimuli. Fun fact! Many plants do actually feel pain, feel in quotes, because it's complicated. Celery specifically even releases the same chemical that our brains do when in pain. At least I think it's celery. It's just some fun fact I remember from long, long ago. It might be asparagus, actually. One of them feels pain when you cut it. Anyways, back to figuring out our question. The animal definition says they have a well-defined shape and have limited growth, essentially saying that they all look roughly the same and they only grow to be so big. And really, this is where a good difference comes in between plants and animals. Most animals can't grow bigger than the rest of their species. Sure, there have been issues causing gigantism, but that is not very common. Now, plants, on the other hand, don't really have any reason to not grow bigger. If they have enough food and water and nutrients, they can realistically grow as massive as they want. The only thing that really stops them at a point is gravity. But look at the redwoods! No, seriously do look at the redwoods. Maybe go to them. They are absolutely gorgeous. But they are strong enough to resist gravity for hundreds of years. Maybe even over 1,000 at times. And they grow massive. So massive that you can drive a car through one that they hollowed out. Why they hollowed it out? I'll never know. Tourism! That poor tree. Also, fun fact! They actually hollowed it out before cars became the normal thing for people to have. So good job guessing the general size of a car in the future, past tree maulers. But in Pokemon, we see that these Pokemon don't grow indefinitely. They do have a normal size. Sure, there are a few outliers here and there, but generally there's no gigantic tentacruel levels of crazy going on. After all, there was some Team Rocket mad science behind that thing. So that's one thing that's actually pretty solid evidence in terms of plant Pokemon actually being animals. But let's get some more to back this up. Let's talk about the cell for a minute. Yes, I know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of a cell because it's a meme at this point, but that's for animal cells. In plant cells, the chloroplast is the powerhouse of the cell. The reason for the difference is that plant cells need to make their own power from the sun, so the mitochondria is quite a bit less used. Now let's talk about cellulose, because cellulose is found pretty much in all plants, save a few marine algae. This stuff is what makes up the structure of all green plants. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about cellulose, but all in all, it's the fibrous material that makes strong plant cells rigid, like building blocks. Another big difference is their vacuoles, pretty much empty spots they can fill in with whatever they want, be it storing nutrients, or just storing garbage until it digests away. These can make up to 90% of the cell, so we're back to plants just getting bigger because their cells can be much larger than animal cells, along with their much more rigid cell walls that they can use to support themselves. So in general, plants can just keep getting bigger. But this info just divides our Pokemon more, so let's start to break it down. For starters, we already discussed that many of the plant Pokemon don't solely rely on photosynthesis. I mean, we see grass types eating poke food all the time. So that must mean that their mitochondria isn't all that underused. They're almost like a hybrid car that can run off of electricity and fossil fuels. They run off of the sun and food. So I'm starting to think that they may actually almost all be a hybrid type of creature. A best of both worlds situation. And notably, it could be that entirely depends on which Pokemon you're talking about. Some Pokemon Dex entries go as far as to state that they love to lounge in the sun, or that they use photosynthesis to gain energy from the sun, but others don't. So it may be that some Pokemon that are grass type are remarkable because of their photosynthesis ability, and that's why it's mentioned in the Pokedex. Or it's just that some Pokemon that are grass type are just completely unremarkable. So there's nothing else to say besides, oh yeah, they're part plant. So really, this is all going to come down to a list of facts about plants and animals. And then we will grant a point to either side depending on what grass types as a whole fit into. Plants normally are unable to move, whereas animals can normally move freely. I'm gonna have to go with grass types being more like animals here for obvious reasons. Like we talked about earlier, plants are able to make their own food. Animals, not so much. So grass-type Pokemon is gonna get a plant point here, as they have leaves, and what is the point of leaves if not for photosynthesis? Clearly then, most grass-type Pokemon can do it. So we're tied. Plants take in CO2 to make oxygen, whereas animals create CO2 as a byproduct of respiration. Well, as stated, theoretically most grass Pokemon with leaves perform photosynthesis, and some of the grass types canonically perform photosynthesis. In fact, Turtwig's Pearl Dex entry even states that it makes oxygen because of this. So really, any green or leafy grass type should inherently have chloroplast in their cells, thus meaning they are able to produce oxygen. So plants are going to have to take that point. Next question is one that we've actually already answered in the last answer. Plant cells generally contain chloroplast along with cellulose. Again, something we already talked about. So another point to them being plants. And finally, last question. Generally, plants have no, or at least very primitive, sensory capabilities, whereas animals have precise or adapted sensories. And for this one, I will have to say that grass Pokemon really are more like animals here, with their eyes and other sensory organs like the noses, tongues, ears, and in some cases, even nerves, theoretically. Grass-type Pokemon really stick out against regular grass. Who knew? So by the very definitions themselves, the final score is 2 to animal, 3 to plant. So by this quick numerical system, they are primarily plants. And I guess that's a pretty decent explanation to the question. Perhaps it really should be a Pokemon by Pokemon question, because like mentioned, some Pokemon like Bulbasaur are a plant on an animal, and that's canon. But then there's Pokemon like Carnivine and Sunflora that are totally just sentient plants. But then still, Leafeon goes and makes things confusing. Its Pokedex entry states that its cells more closely resemble those of a plant than an animal. And it evolved from an animal Pokemon. Meaning
that this video is worthless filler and there's no real answer.
But it also begs the question, if you do eat a purely plant Pokemon, does it still count as being vegetarian? Would consuming the flesh of a Steenie be considered okay? And I don't mean in that way. Anywho, got any points to add? Got any ethical questions about Pokemon? Then you let me know down below. And until next time, please remember to never stop using your noggin.
Really though, an oddish salad? Disgusting.